This just in. There's a moment that happens between opening the email and realizing what it means. A moment where your brain short circuits trying to figure out how an image from a 2019 blog post just became a €3,000 problem. That moment is brought to you by PicRights on behalf of global media institutions who apparently found the time between wars and elections to police your sidebar graphics. Their emails arrive looking less like a scam and more like a formal warning from someone who once worked at the Pentagon. The logos are familiar, the language is sharp, and the number at the bottom, the kind that makes you double check your bank account and wonder if you've accidentally committed international crimes via JPEG. Let's pause right there, because while these demands feel official, heavy, and terrifying, what you're experiencing is not guilt, it's pressure. And pressure is not the same as proof. Here's why these emails hit harder than Pixie or CopyTrack. Pixie and CopyTrack also hunt for unlicensed images online, but they play a volume game. Their strategy relies on panic, not precision. Their emails are aggressive, but once challenged, they often back down or quietly disappear into the inbox ether. PicRights is a different creature. This is enforcement at an institutional level. It's not some guy in Berlin emailing you about a stock photo from 2014. It's a Swiss-based firm representing multi-billion euro media organizations with real legal departments and litigation budgets that exceed your annual revenue. That doesn't mean they're always right, but it does mean they expect you to act like they are. The tactic works because of two things: credibility and intimidation. When the Associated Press is in the sender field, most people assume resistance is futile. But as we'll see, credibility does not excuse coercion, and institutional muscle doesn't override the rule of the law. Here is the critical distinction. PicRights has authorization to enforce copyright on behalf of AFP and Reuters. They are not a government body or a court. They cannot issue fines or declare you guilty. Only courts have that authority. So here's a step-by-step of what to do when the email hits. This is the plan, not the emotional plan, which is to cry and check the exchange rates, but the practical one. Step 1, stay calm and archive everything. Before you do anything else, create a folder. Save the email, the referenced image, screenshots of how it appeared on your site, and the date it was published. You are building a timeline, not a confession. This is evidence, not an apology tour. Step 2, remove the image with a paper trail. Take the image off your website, but keep a clear note. Removed pending verification of licensing status. This phrase is your best friend. It acknowledges the issue without admitting guilt. It shows good faith without surrendering. Step 3, ask for proof before you say anything else. You're not obligated to explain. You're obligated to verify. Send a calm, short message requesting proof that their client owns the image, the date the image was registered, if it was, confirmation that the image wasn't licensed to you via any stock platform, how they calculated the demand amount, and proof that PicRights has authority to act on the client's behalf. These are not hostile questions. They are foundational. If they can't provide these things, the demand rests on intimidation rather than evidence. Don't admit anything too early. This one's important. Courts pay attention to language, so sorry, I didn't know might sound like humility, but it can be read as admission of guilt. Until you've verified the facts, avoid phrases that suggest fault. Use language like, we are reviewing our licensing records, not, we didn't realize we used the image. One is neutral, the other is ammunition. PicRights wins sometimes, but usually not what they ask for. So yes, PicRights has litigated, and yes, they have won cases. But even in successful court cases, judges routinely award far less than PicRights originally demanded. In one set of rulings from France, courts reduced claimed amounts by 70% or more. In other words, the 3,000 euros they demanded turned into 800 by the time it reached a legal ruling, which tells you everything you need to know about their business model. The threat is real, but the number, negotiable, and often inflated. And here's what they're not telling you about copyright law. And this is where clarity matters. In the United States, statutory damages are only available if an image was registered with the Copyright Office before the alleged infringement occurred. If it was registered later, statutory damages are off the table, and the claimant must prove actual loss. Outside the US, including South Africa and much of Europe, copyright exists automatically without registration. However, damages are still not assumed. The claimant must show actual harm, commercial impact, or unjust enrichment. The absence of registration does not eliminate copyright, but it does weaken inflated damage claims. So different countries, but same principle. They must prove harm, not just claim it. Then there's the originality problem that PicRights rarely mentions. Copyright protects original works. Not all news photographs qualify. When multiple photographers stand in the same press pool, photographing the same event from the same angle, originality becomes legally contestable. Courts have recognized this. In a 2024 French case involving PicRights, the court rejected the claim because the photograph lacked sufficient originality. It was a standard image of a public event that any photographer could have captured. This matters because originality is not automatic. It must be demonstrated. Composition, timing, creative choice, and execution all factor in. A generic press photograph is far easier to challenge than PicRights would like you to believe. And this is your secret weapon against PicRights. Demand they prove the image is original under copyright law, not just unique. Ask for the photographer's creative choices, lighting, composition, timing, angle. And if it's a standard press photo, you have grounds to challenge copyright validity itself. South African copyright law also requires originality. In cases involving news photography, that requirement can become a meaningful line of defense. Let's also look at who PicRights actually sues and who they usually don't. This is a detail most demand emails leave out. PicRights does litigate, but primarily against commercial entities. Court records show cases involving brands, manufacturers, and businesses with revenue, not hobby blogs, not small editorial sites with minimal traffic, not passion projects. They still send demands broadly because settlements is their business model, but the risk of actual court action drops significantly when the use was editorial, low traffic, and non-commercial. That does not make the demand harmless, but it does change how you assess risk. And that brings me to my experience and why it changed my thinking. I've had my own run-ins with CopyTrack. They sent one of their classic demands, legal sounding, vaguely threatening, and sprinkled with just enough German punctuation to feel official. The image in question had been used in a blog post on one of my clients' sites. I checked my records and struggled to find the license, so I had to request it from Canva. I replied to CopyTrack with a firm but polite email, pointing that out before sending them the license when I finally received it a few days later. They didn't apologize or acknowledge the mistake. They just stopped replying. The whole thing dragged on for about a week. A week of me rechecking old blog drafts, digging through design folders, and wondering how many small business owners had paid up simply because they didn't have the time to do the same. That week stuck with me, not because it was dramatic, but because of how much unpaid labor it required. What struck me most was the tone, the structure, and the complete lack of obligation to prove anything from their side before demanding money. The assumption of guilt was built into every sentence. PicRights feels like the older cousin of that email. Wealthier, polished, better dressed, and yet still wrong. Their message arrives with more restraint, but the core tactic hasn't changed. It's still pressure over proof. It's still process avoidance. It's still built on the hope that you're too busy, too confused, or too afraid to push back. And in their case, they lean harder on legal logos and partner firms because they know it works. If you're a small business owner who's never dealt with a legal demand before, the tone alone is enough to make you want to pay just to make it stop. But here's the part that keeps sticking. When lawyers, people trained in the rules of procedure, choose to bypass that process in favor of intimidation, it's not just unpleasant. It's dishonest. Creators deserve protection. I'm not arguing that at all. But so do the people being accused. Fairness is not a luxury reserved for those who can afford lawyers. It's a principle. It is supposed to apply even when you mess up, even when you're a small business that made an honest mistake, even when the person on the other side of the email has a better letterhead than you do. If we expect businesses to honor copyright, then we should expect enforcement agencies and their attorneys to honor due process, because no one should have to choose between protecting their reputation and challenging something that might not even be legitimate, especially not when the threat is coming from people who should know better. That brings me to the South African context and why it matters everywhere. In South Africa, as in many countries outside the US and EU, foreign companies do not get to walk into court and start making demands without consequence. Our legal system, while far from perfect, still insists on some skin in the game. Specifically, it often requires a foreign claimant to post security for costs before proceeding with legal action. This is not a quirky procedural footnote. It is a deliberate safeguard that discourages speculative or weak claims by making them financially risky to pursue. That doesn't mean you're immune from enforcement. It means the playing field is not as tilted as PicRights would like you to believe. It means there is friction, and friction buys you time. Time to verify, time to respond properly, and time to consult someone who understands your legal context better than a Swiss enforcement firm that sends demand emails for a living. A few years ago, a community newspaper here, Ponderland Times, found itself in PicRights' crosshairs. They had used a handful of AFP images, likely in good faith, in a piece of reporting that had nothing to do with profit or sensationalism. The demand that followed was not small, over 15,000 Rand. That is a painful number for a small paper operating in a rural area on limited funds. They removed the images immediately, they responded respectfully, and they tried to find a middle ground. PicRights, by all accounts, wouldn't move an inch. Eventually, the situation made national news. Not because the paper had done anything scandalous. It made news because the legal demand felt grossly out of step with the nature of the infringement. And because the tactics used raised questions about whether these types of copyright enforcement efforts have lost all sense of proportion. This is why your local legal framework matters. PicRights and others like them operate globally. They scan everything. They send emails everywhere, but they do not control how your country handles disputes. They do not get to bypass your legal procedures just because they operate from a different continent. And in many jurisdictions, including South Africa, the UK, parts of Australia, and Canada, those procedures offer far more protection than small business owners realize. Local law is the firewall between you and a legal overreach masquerading as justice. It matters even when the demand arrives in flawless English, on polished letterhead, referencing international copyright treaties. Because at the end of the day, it is your courts that decide what counts, not theirs. But what if you really did use the image incorrectly? Let's assume the uncomfortable scenario. You check your records and you realize there was no license. you messed up. That doesn't mean you write a blank check. You still have rights. Your negotiation position depends on 3 factors. Number 1, commercial versus editorial use. If the image was in a blog post about current events, so editorial, you have stronger fair use arguments. If it was on your homepage selling products, so commercial, you're more exposed. PicRights knows this and calculates demands accordingly, but their calculations are inflated. Number 2, traffic and revenue impact. A blog post with 500 views is not the same as a product page with 50,000 views. Demand their traffic data for your specific page. They have it from their scans. If they can't prove significant commercial impact, their damages claim collapses. Number 3, timing and good faith, because yes, that still matters. Removed within 24 hours, like I suggested, that's mitigation. Used for 3 years, that's exposure. Immediate removal plus a calm email offering a reasonable fee is not an admission of liability, just a licensing offer. It shows you're engaging in the way any sensible business would. What's reasonable? Well, start with what the license would have cost. For a basic editorial use image on a low traffic blog, that's often between 50 and 150 euros. Add 20% as a penalty buffer, and you're sitting at around 200 to 300 euros. That's not generous, it's realistic, it's fair, and it's far less than the 1,500 or more that they tend to ask for. If they escalate, especially if the demand crosses 2,000 euros, involves commercial use case, or starts naming court dates and local attorneys, don't try to guess. Spend the 300 euros on a copyright lawyer. A real one. They'll check if AFP actually registered the image. In many cases, they actually haven't. Whether your usage qualifies as fair dealing or transformative. Whether the local law firm PicRights claims is involved, actually plans to litigate, or is just name dropping. Making a mistake doesn't waive your right to due process. It doesn't mean you owe them everything they ask. And it certainly doesn't mean you have to sit quietly while someone with more money tries to scare you into submission. Clarity is a shield. In marketing, I talk a lot about clarity. It builds trust, but clarity also protects. In these cases, vague threats feel powerful until they're exposed to light. Once you slow things down, ask for detail, and verify the facts, you take back control. That's what due process is for. Not just for the innocent, for everyone. If you want help building a business that communicates clearly from the start, then download my free 5-minute marketing fix. It gives you one strong sentence that explains what your business does and why it matters. You can download it for free in the description below, or you can go to strategicmarketingtribe.com/fix. But what about you? Have you ever received a legal-looking demand email? I'll go first. CopyTrack once accused me of using an image I had a license for. I spent a week chasing Canva support so I could send them proof. They vanished the moment I did. Okay, your turn. What's your copyright horror story? Let me know in the comments. I'm Vicky Sidler from the Strategic Marketing Tribe, and I post helpful news updates for small businesses every day.